I'm Natalie Moore, 30 years old. For years, I've grown used to the whispers behind cupped hands. She's the poor one. Still working that IT job, as if I were an outsider, only related by accident, not blood. What no one at this family dinner realizes is that a decade of their dismissive jokes and backhanded compliments has fueled me to build something far bigger than the titles or properties they love to flaunt. I glance at my phone, feeling the weight of the secret I've carried into this room, a truth waiting for just the right moment. If you've ever sat at a table feeling out of place among your own family, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit subscribe and stick around, because tonight, they're about to learn what real power looks like, and it's nothing like the designer labels they worship. I was born into a traditional American family, big, loud, and never short of chaotic reunions. The Moore family was considered a model of outward success. Everyone always appeared put together, constantly talking about business deals, home purchases, new cars, or how well their latest investments were performing. From my grandfather down to my uncles, bragging had practically become a family ritual at every gathering. When I was little, my grandmother would often pull me onto her lap, gently brush my hair aside, and whisper, "Sweetheart, you must always remember our family cannot afford to fall behind anyone." To them, a person's worth seemed to be measured solely by the balance in their bank account or the square footage of their house. Even from an early age, I could sense I was the outlier. I was the youngest daughter, always seen as overly sensitive, quick to tears, and supposedly lacking the qualities needed to make it big. My older brother, Brandon, was the family's golden child. He got into an Ivy League university and now works at a major investment firm in Manhattan. My cousin Ashley, another star in the family, ran her own marketing company and always showed up flaunting designer bags, her eyes sparkling as she talked about million-dollar deals. I still remember those family dinners, where the adults would go on about real estate and stocks, while I sat quietly in a corner of the table, taking in the smell of grilled meat and the sound of their laughter. Occasionally, someone would toss me a casual, condescending question. "So, Natalie, what are you up to these days? Still doing those little computer gigs?" The words always seemed light, even playful, but they carved a deep, lingering wound inside me. Every small achievement of mine was dismissed or ignored. When I earned a college scholarship, my mother just shrugged. "That major won't make you much money anyway. Just study for fun." Anytime I tried to share a personal project or a small business idea, my father would glance over his glasses and sigh. "You should learn to be practical like your brother. Stop chasing pipe dreams." Eventually, I learned to stay silent, to tuck away the things that brought me joy. Even when I got my first return on a small investment, I celebrated alone with a simple dinner. I knew no one would truly care. They only remembered me when they needed a token example of a nice kid who still hadn't gotten her life together or secured a real career. As I grew older, the truth became painfully clear. In my family's eyes, I was a stranger in familiar clothing. Thanksgiving dinners and Christmas gatherings became a stage where I played the quiet extra, listening to everyone boast about new houses, investment plans, or how they were pooling funds to buy up a block of townhomes and divide them among different branches of the family. During those moments, I'd turn invisible, serving dishes, listening to them strategize, and laughing over old stories as if nothing had ever changed. It felt like no matter how hard I worked, nothing I did would ever fit within their narrow definition of success. What no one knew was the truth behind the polished surface and those grand reunions. Our family was far from stable. My parents had secretly taken out high-interest loans just to save face in front of the relatives. My uncles did the same. One evening, as I passed by the living room, I overheard my mother whispering to my father, "If we can't cover this month's payments, I don't know how we'll show our faces at your parents' place." But that night's dinner still unfolded flawlessly. Not a single soul let slip the reality behind our sparkling facade. Perhaps the only real difference between me and the rest of the Moore family was that I never believed money defined a person's worth. Despite growing up surrounded by endless parties, luxury cars, elegant dresses, and loud declarations about brilliant futures, I was drawn to simplicity. I preferred listening to the world instead of arguing with it. I was always curious about things outside the traditional mold that my family worshipped. When I was a freshman in college, while my cousins discussed studying abroad, getting MBAs, and joining the family business, I chose to major in information technology. It was the first decision that made me the punchline of countless jokes. A Moore girl going into IT? Who's going to take care of her later? I laughed along, but deep down, a part of me feared they were right. I didn't fit the carefully polished image expected of someone carrying the Moore name. I still remember how it felt sitting in my tiny rented room, yellow light spilling over my cluttered desk. I studied programming diligently, pouring hours into freelance projects. The income wasn't much, but every dollar I earned filled me with pride. That money wasn't for shopping or showing off. It paid for tuition, rent, and bit by bit, I started saving for something bigger. Classmates often invited me on trips, and I always declined, reluctant to spend the little savings I had, knowing I'd need it for the future I was building in silence. I never told my parents or cousins that I was working part-time. I definitely didn't mention the sleepless nights debugging code or the nerve-wracking hours waiting for client feedback over email. I knew if they ever found out, my efforts would only fuel more ridicule. Over time, my curiosity and love for tech led me deeper into new territories: blockchain, cryptocurrency, artificial intelligence. I knew I didn't have the capital to invest like the others, but I had time and the grit to learn. For months, I quietly participated in online forums, read white papers, and taught myself how to develop blockchain applications using free video tutorials. There were nights I was completely exhausted, questioning if I was on the right path at all. But each time I recalled their mockery, I found a renewed sense of purpose. I knew that if I simply lived the life my family expected of me, I would never truly grow. My world truly began to change when I turned 25 and met Ryan. A friend, a partner, and eventually, the man I would fall in love with. Ryan was not only sharp and intelligent, but also deeply passionate about tech and financial investment. From our very first conversation, he made me feel like I could become anyone I wanted if I dared to try. He told me about Silicon Valley startups, about losing everything more than once, and still getting back up to start again. For the first time in my life, I felt seen, not as the youngest daughter of the Moore family, but as Natalie, a woman who dared to dream big even when no one else believed in her. Ryan and I became an unlikely pair, studying together, working side by side, and nurturing a bold dream: to build a tech platform that connected small-scale investors with promising real estate projects. There were nights we sat in a tiny cafe downtown, heatedly debating ideas, scribbling plans onto napkins, and it was then I truly understood what passion meant. Every time I doubted myself, Ryan would look me in the eye and say, "Do you even know how brilliant you are? Just go for it. Don't be scared, and if you fail, I'll fail with you." Those words of encouragement were something I had never once heard from my own family. We started from scratch, pooling together a few $1,000s, taking on app development gigs from overseas companies, and using whatever profit we earned to reinvest in cryptocurrencies, ones that, back then, few people dared to touch. At one point, my bank account dropped to double digits. I thought I'd have to give up. But Ryan was always there. "You don't owe anyone a damn thing. But if you want success, don't ever let fear make you miss your shot." From him, I learned perseverance, how to embrace risk, and most importantly, how to keep an open mind toward new ideas. 1 year passed, then 2, then 3. I grew up through every stumble, every tiny success. Our little company finally turned a profit. We started attracting attention from investors. I was no longer the girl who merely dreamed. I had become a bona fide tech and finance professional. But I kept these milestones to myself. At every family dinner, I still sat quietly at the corner of the table, listening as they laughed about other people's failed investments as if it were entertainment. No one knew that I had already begun to accumulate real assets, that I'd built my own capital, and, most importantly, that I had carved out a future that didn't depend on anyone else. I remember vividly the first time I had the courage to speak up at a family meeting, one where they were discussing the inheritance of our grandparents' last piece of land. I had spent weeks researching the property's value, comparing market trends, and even prepared a full PowerPoint presentation, hoping. All I got in return were dismissive smirks and a condescending comment from my uncle. "Natalie, sweetheart, you work in IT. What do you know about real estate?" My throat tightened, my face burned, but I couldn't say another word. From that moment on, every time I thought about offering my input again, a voice inside me whispered, "Don't make a fool of yourself, not again." Bit by bit, I was pushed further out of every circle where decisions were made. Whenever the family held meetings to discuss new investment opportunities, laughter filled the room while I was left in the kitchen clearing dishes. One time, my mother gently told me, "Sweetheart, girls shouldn't worry so much about finances. Just live peacefully with what's enough." In that moment, I wanted to tell her that I didn't want to just live quietly. I wanted more. But I said nothing, knowing that any word I spoke would be labeled difficult or rebellious. Every time I suggested investing in new technology, they shook their heads. "You're always chasing something unrealistic," they'd say. "Too risky. Why not honor the family's traditions instead?" I used to sit quietly in the kitchen, listening to the bursts of laughter echoing from the living room, and wonder if anyone else in the world had ever felt this excluded. Even on major holidays, when plans were made for group vacations or large joint property investments, I was only informed at the last minute. Once, I transferred money for a joint investment they'd claimed was for every family member, only to later discover my name had been tacked on at the end of the list, and when the profits were split, I was completely forgotten. When I brought it up, my cousin Ashley just shrugged and said, "Maybe they forgot, Natalie. Don't be so sensitive." I smiled, but deep down I knew, in this family, if you didn't hold power or a strong voice, you'd always be pushed to the margins. The coldness became harder to ignore. One time, they made the decision to sell our old family home, the house had grown up in, without even bothering to ask me, despite my name being listed in the will. When I found out and called to ask, my cousin put me on speaker so everyone could hear, then said loudly, "Natalie, do you want to keep the house? If not, just sign the paperwork quickly, okay? We've got more important things to handle." I could hear them laughing in the background. It felt like I was being cast out by a crowd of my own blood. I signed the papers without another word. It became routine for the family to use my not owning a house yet as a running joke at gatherings. Comments like, "Wonder when Natalie's gonna bring a boyfriend home and finally buy a place like her cousin." Or, "They've already built 2-3 properties. Natalie's probably still saving up every check pack." These remarks became a sort of seasoning, expected and always there, adding sting to every conversation. Sometimes my father would glance at me quietly, as if he wanted to say something but couldn't. I knew he was under pressure from the rest of the family too, but he never once stood up for me. All he ever said was, "Hang in there, sweetheart. Things will work out." But that soft reassurance only made me feel smaller, lost in a family that liked to pretend it was united. There was even a time I overheard my mother whispering to my aunt, "If only Natalie would just settle down and get married like everyone else, maybe I wouldn't have to worry so much." Sometimes I couldn't help but wonder, who was I really living for? Myself? Or for the approval of a family that had never once recognized the effort I put into everything? I'd lost count of how many times the feeling of being excluded made me want to give up entirely, to skip the family gatherings filled with cold stares and careless words. But every time Ryan pulled me close and whispered, "I believe in you, Natalie," I found just enough warmth to keep going. Ryan was the only one who truly understood me. He listened when I shared ideas, helped me assess risks, and most importantly, he never once made me feel small or like a failure. Once, after I vented about a particularly humiliating family meeting, he just smiled and said, "They might not see your worth now, but one day they'll have no choice but to acknowledge it." I laughed at the time, though I couldn't quite believe it. Because I knew some wounds inflicted by family cut deeper than any business failure ever could. Many nights I'd lie awake wondering if I was wasting my time trying to prove my value to people who had never wanted to see it. But Ryan remained by my side, reminding me again and again that I didn't need anyone's validation but my own. Each day, I kept working, building my projects, learning how to care for myself even if the feeling of being on the outside never completely disappeared. I no longer looked forward to family reunions. I simply observed them, quietly noting every word, every gesture. Because I believed, sometimes the more painful an experience is, the more it pushes you to grow. And even if I had been cast out, I knew, beyond that closed door, a new journey was waiting for me. Maybe every family has that one defining moment, when all the quiet cracks suddenly explode into something irreversible. For me, that moment came during a summer family meeting. The heat that day was suffocating, the air thick with expensive perfume, the scent of grilled meat and the tension of quiet calculations filling every corner of the room. The Moore family had gathered in full force, everyone dressed in their finest, the table stacked. To an outsider, it might have looked like a corporate economic summit, not just a typical family get-together. I stepped into the living room with the kind of numb acceptance that only comes from years of being overlooked. It had been so long since I expected any acknowledgement, any voice in the room, but that day, when Uncle Peter, the family's unofficial chief accountant, pointed at the stack of documents and said sternly, "Today we need to finalize the last details of Grandpa and Grandma's assets. If you don't have anything to say, just sign here so the rest of us can move things along." I felt a chill race down my spine. I was about to speak up, to ask a question, but my other uncle cut in, his tone thick with implication. Anyone who still hasn't bought their own house should probably just listen quietly and let the grown-ups handle it. That sentence landed heavier than any of their past jabs, because it wasn't just a casual remark, it was a public declaration. I, Natalie Moore, was still just a shadow, an outsider within my own bloodline. Everyone turned to look at me. A few shrugged, a few chuckled under their breath. My cousin Ashley even raised her finger to her lips in a shushing gesture, as if all I needed to do was stay silent and sign the papers. No one asked what I thought. No one cared about the years of quiet effort I had poured into becoming something more. They just needed me to shut up so things could go their way. I looked at the stack of documents, bitterness rising in my throat. Among them was the deed to the last piece of land I still shared with my grandfather. The same land tied to my childhood memories. The garden where I had once planted white chrysanthemums. The attic room where I used to read for hours, forgotten while the rest of the family bustled downstairs. They wanted to sell it, to split the money among those who truly contributed to the family, as Uncle Peter phrased it, meaning those with houses, cars, and big investments. And me, I was just expected to sign only to be excluded from the actual list of beneficiaries. The meeting carried on. They talked about new investments, transfer plans, even discussed buying a new condo for my recently divorced cousin. No one asked what I wanted. No one cared how I felt about being left out of the big family plans. And then came the final blow. My cousin Nick, who always liked to call himself successful, turned and said loudly, "Hey, maybe Natalie should just sell off her share of that land and pitch in for the family." Makes sense, at least she'd finally be useful to the clan. Laughter broke out. Heads nodded in agreement. And I shattered inside. I even heard more daughter was still in their eyes. In that moment, I sat still in a crowded room that somehow felt like it held only me. My hands clenched tightly, fingernails digging painfully into my palms. I thought, what if I just screamed so they'd finally understand how hard I had tried to survive, how many times I had fallen and gotten back up. But then it hit me, words held no weight in this family. Only signatures mattered, and I finally understood that I could no longer beg for validation from people who had long since sealed off any door to empathy. When the papers were passed to me, their eyes revealed their impatience. "Just sign, Natalie, so we can all get home sooner." I took a deep breath and signed the final sheet, feeling as if I had just signed my own exile. An exile from this family, from my childhood, from any lingering illusion that I still belonged. No one said thank you. No one asked how I felt, only the scrape of chairs, the shuffle of sandals on tile, and murmurs about which upscale restaurant they'd picked to celebrate this success. As I left the meeting, the sun still hung golden behind the trees in the yard, but to me, the light had long gone out. I walked slowly toward the parking lot, my heart heavy like stone, my throat tight. I wanted to cry, but no tears came. I called Ryan, and all I managed to say was, "Babe, I had just been officially erased from my family." There was a pause on the other end. Then Ryan's voice came gently. "Natalie, you are never expendable. One day they'll have no choice but to see your true worth. But first, you have to believe it yourself." I ended the call quietly and drove back to my small apartment in the city, carrying a hollowness I'd never felt before. That night, I curled up in bed in the silent room, staring at the dark ceiling, drowning in despair. Everything I had ever worked for had earned me nothing but the label you repeated more times than I could count. And I asked myself, was there anything left to lose? Or was it time to let go of every single expectation to begin a new journey, where the only things that mattered were me and what I truly believed in? In the days that followed, I withdrew from every phone call, every message from my family. My phone buzzed constantly with notifications from the family group chat, but I didn't have the strength to open them anymore. It wasn't about being cold or prideful. It was just that every time I saw a familiar name, I was pulled right back into those indifferent stares, those cutting words from that day. Maybe for the first time in my life, I truly felt like I didn't belong anywhere. Not with my relatives, not in any of the circles I'd once tried to be part of. I felt like I was drifting in the very city I had once dreamed would be the safe haven of a new Natalie. Being cast out, being treated like an extra. I went to work like a machine, completing every task, every project with mechanical precision, numb to everything else. Sometimes coworkers invited me to lunch, and I'd make an excuse or nod politely just to avoid explaining. I feared even the smallest social gathering at a cafe, terrified that a simple, well-meaning question might accidentally cut into the wound still bleeding inside me. Every night, I came home to my familiar apartment, kicked off my shoes at the door, and collapsed onto the sofa, eyes shut tightly, just hoping that one day I'd stop dreaming of family dinners echoing with ridicule. On many of those nights, I'd quietly look through old photos, me next to the apple tree as a child. The whole family around the Christmas dinner table, when I was still the shy little girl sitting in the corner, and I asked myself, was it a mistake to choose a different path, to pick it instead of real estate, to live frugally, to take risks in tech and crypto even when no one believed in me? I had asked myself that question 1,000 times, blamed myself for not meeting their expectations, then tormented myself wondering how long it would take for the hurt to heal. There were moments when I thought about walking away from it all, quitting my job, moving to a far-off city, severing every tie to the past. But deep inside, something still held on, a fragile kind of pride. It was now the only anchor keeping me upright. Ryan saw that. He didn't ask why I cried. He didn't press when I went quiet. He just sat beside me. Sometimes he'd gently wrap an arm around my shoulder. Other times, he'd hand me a hot cup of tea with a tiny note. "If you ever feel like you have no one, remember you still have yourself, and you still have me." With no pressure to prove anything to anyone but myself, I poured every ounce of energy into building the startup with Ryan. We worked tirelessly, writing every line of code, analyzing every potential investment. While the city slept, our lights stayed on, talking late into the night about big ideas, about the dream of creating real value for people like me, people who had been dismissed, underestimated. Every small win, a signed contract, a profitable investment became a dose of medicine, a remedy that slowly lifted me out of the long, paralyzing fog of invisibility and helplessness. At one point, I was practically living in the office. My desk was buried in ledgers, invoices, and business plans. Dark circles haunted my eyes, but in them the fire of determination was returning. Loneliness still crept in sometimes. I learned to look pain in the eye, to confront the shadows inside me. I started jotting down the small things I was grateful for each day. A thank you email from a client. An encouraging message from Ryan. A morning I woke up without fear of the past. Every step forward at work, no matter how small, helped me reclaim my self-worth. Our startup gradually gained recognition in the market. We attracted our first investors. New opportunities kept knocking. I kept all of it secret, not because I feared my family finding out, but because I needed to know that everything I achieved came from me. That no one could take it away. That no one had the right to diminish it. I told myself, from now on, no matter how harsh life gets, I will never again allow myself to be an extra in the story of my own life. In the end, maybe the greatest triumph isn't being recognized by the whole world. It's finding that one person who chooses to stay, even through your darkest nights. Ryan was that person for me. He never asked me to detail my pain, never forced me to relive the past to find reasons for the hurt. He simply stayed, a quiet presence, a gentle reminder that I was worthy of something far better than the scornful looks I'd once accepted as normal. On weekend nights, when the city outside glowed with lights but my room was lit only by the flicker of a laptop and the scent of warm tea, Ryan would gently place his hand on my shoulder and ask, "Want to take a break, Natalie? Or maybe tell me about the dream you had when you were little." That question always made me pause, lower my shoulders, and feel a gentle warmth fill my chest. Once, I asked Ryan why he believed in me so much, even when I struggled to believe in myself. He simply smiled and said, "Because I see someone who never gives up. Do you know how many people quit after just one harsh judgment? But not you. That's your true worth." His words brought me to tears, not out of sadness, but because for the first time I felt clean, as though all the old shame had finally been washed away. In that moment, I knew I didn't want to remain the victim of abandonment anymore. I wanted to become the author of my own story. I didn't need someone to hand me an opportunity. I would build it with my own hands. The success of our small startup slowly became a strong foundation for something bigger. After years of relentless effort, our company finally turned a major profit. We secured funding from an international investment firm, expanded operations, hired more staff, and started setting our sights on larger goals. Every signed contract took me one step further away from the shadow of poor Natalie my family had once branded me. I chose humility. Because I knew true value didn't lie in grand displays. It lived in quiet, steady perseverance behind the scenes. Ryan encouraged me to step into a new territory. Ryan and I created a meticulous plan. We enrolled in investment courses, studied legal frameworks, analyzed markets, and quietly began buying up old houses once owned by different Moore relatives. We invested in new projects across promising neighborhoods, never revealing who was behind the deals. We used our company's legal entity, entirely detached from our personal names, to avoid every prying eye or whispered suspicion from the family. With every successful transaction, my confidence surged. I was no longer afraid of questions like, "Have you bought a house yet?" or "So, any big deals lately?" Because deep down, I knew I was now holding keys to doors I had once only dreamed of opening. I started seeing the world differently. No more fear of being excluded, no more urge to prove myself to anyone. For me, true freedom was the realization that I had the right to walk away from anything that didn't value me, to leave without bitterness or regret, to protect my worth quietly. Ryan was the first person who ever dared to speak my success aloud. One night, after a major deal closed, he held me in his arms and whispered, "You're strong enough now, Natalie. Maybe it's time to let the world see your true value." I smiled, eyes shimmering with gratitude. He was right. If I once lived for recognition, now I moved for joy, for the quiet thrill of proving. We spent countless nights preparing for every possibility. If my family found out, if they accused, pleaded, or even tried to sue, our legal paperwork was airtight. I learned to stand firm in the face of any risk, to defend what I had built. That sense of ownership spread to other parts of my life. I began accepting speaking engagements at tech conferences, women who had once been dismissed just like I had. Every story I told, every pair of admiring eyes, healed another piece of my past. One evening, as I sat by the window with golden light flooding the room, Ryan took my hand and said, "I'm proud of you. Not just for everything you've achieved, but because you never abandoned yourself." In that moment, I realized all the pain, the rejection, they weren't endings, they were the starting lines. The push I needed to grow, to fight, to stand. If I once searched for a family to belong to, I now understood the safest, most powerful family was the one I built from my own values, with someone who loved me honestly. Life always moves in strange circles. The very things we were once mocked for sometimes become our greatest turning points. When Ryan and I officially took our company public, our real estate deals fully closed. I thought I had finally left the old wounds behind, but it all came rushing back one afternoon when I received an email from the city's largest asset management firm. The message was clear. The entire Moore family housing block was to be transferred to a new owner within 30 days. I sat silently, feeling time slow to a crawl, as if fate itself was gently returning everything to where it truly belonged. The emergency family meeting was held just a week later, but this time the atmosphere was different. There were no boisterous laughs, no condescending glances. The room, once a proud chamber of Moore family legacy, now felt suffocating, thick with fear and uncertainty. I had been summoned as a formality, and for the first time in years, everyone was waiting for me to speak instead of ignoring me or pushing me aside. My cousin Nick, who used to radiate smug superiority, now trembled as he reread the notice aloud. The new owner is a company called Revengehorizons Holdings. If this isn't resolved, we'll lose everything. I sat at the head of the table, quietly observing every faces I had once begged to understand me. Now pale, desperate, clenched hands, whispers turning into blame. It's because someone didn't pay their share to maintain the property. Maybe someone in the family sold us out. I said nothing. After a while, Uncle Peter, once the loudest voice in dividing the family's wealth, turned to me, trying to sound composed. "Natalie, you're good with business, tech." But even then, his tone carried entitlement, as if I owed it to them, as if I were obligated to save the great Moore name. I looked around the room, feeling the steady beat of my own heart. Then I stood up. I didn't need flashy presentations or dramatic speeches. I simply reached into my bag and pulled out a thin folder, and I spoke slowly, clearly, so none of them could ever dismiss me again. "Do you remember what you've all said to me over the years? All those dinners where I was only asked if IT makes real money. The times I shared ideas, only to be laughed off as foolish. Today, I'm here with the evidence of the path you always mocked, and I want to make it very clear. Every property, every piece of land the Moore family currently occupies is now owned by me and Ryan, through our company." A thick silence descended over the room. One by one, their eyes rose to meet mine, to belief written across every face. I didn't need to raise my voice. I didn't need to cry. I simply placed the folder on the table and slid it across to Uncle Peter, Cousin Nick, and the others who had shut me out of every decision. I used my own money, my own effort, to quietly buy back every asset you assumed would always belong to this family name, and today I've finalized the sale to a new developer. You have 30 days to make arrangements and vacate the premises. No one gets to look down on me again. Sharp intakes of breath, soft gasp, then sobs. My mother stood and staggered toward me, tears streaming down her cheeks. She reached for my hand, pleading, "Natalie, please don't do this. This is your home, our home." I pulled my hand back gently, my voice calm but unshakable. "I've waited my whole life for this apology, Mom, but this time I'm living for myself." Nick stammered, "You can't do this." I smiled, light for the first time in years. Family isn't just about taking, it's about giving. I've given enough. What's left I'm keeping for me. Some begged, some cursed, but no one could change the truth. For the first time, I was in full control of my destiny, in front of the very people who once treated me like I didn't matter. I wasn't seeking revenge. I wasn't there to hurt anyone. I was simply drawing the line, shining where value ends and self-respect begins. A lesson I had to teach myself after a lifetime of being diminished. After what felt like an insurmountable turning point, my life entered a completely new chapter. There were no more tense family meetings, no more judgmental glances whenever I crossed the threshold of the old house. I realized I was truly free. Freedom wasn't just about holding power over the Moore estate, but about releasing the burdens I had carried for so long. The fear of being abandoned, compared, and dismissed. Some mornings, I wake to the sunrise casting soft light across the little plants I tend myself. I start my day without that heaviness in my chest, without being haunted by suggestive calls or cryptic messages from relatives. Instead, I hear Ryan laughing in the kitchen as he experiments with a new bread recipe. I lead mentorship calls with young entrepreneurs who remind me of the girl I once was. I quietly support small charities for women who've been underestimated, just like I had been. Every passing day, I see more clearly. My worth isn't something anyone else gets to define. It's the journey of not giving up and being grateful I never did. Strangely enough, I no longer feel angry with my family. They began to value each person more, to listen instead of competing, to care sincerely instead of measuring achievements. A few others remained the same, still blaming me for what they lost, but their words no longer hurt me. I understand now, you can only change yourself. You can't carry the emotions or expectations of an entire world. It's the safety I've found within. A true home that doesn't exist at any address, but in growth, peace, and the courage to live honestly. I keep investing. I keep building the company with Ryan, but I also make space for things I once neglected. A weekend getaway, a quiet afternoon at a cafe with a good book, oil paintings I paint just for me. Once I was invited to share my story with hundreds of young people beginning their startup journeys. Standing on that stage, looking into their hopeful eyes, I realized I wasn't the same Natalie anymore. I spoke of the nights I cried alone in a big city, of the pain of feeling invisible in my own family, of the partner who stood by me when I felt most fragile, and of the moment I chose to reclaim my value in front of them all. I didn't share it to say something simple. You don't have to define yourself by how others see you. Every brave step you take, no matter how small, is a true victory. Since then, I've received letters, messages from people wounded by their families or communities. One young woman wrote, "You gave me hope that I'm not invisible even if someone once denied my worth." Those words brought tears to my eyes. They reminded me that this journey wasn't just for me. It had become a light for others, a spark of courage for someone ready to step out of the shadows of the past. When I look back now, I no longer feel sorrow over the years I spent being cast aside. Instead, I feel grateful, because it was those very wounds that made me strong enough to build a new life. A life not handed to me, not granted by anyone. A life that no longer repeated old pain. A life where I'm no longer repeated old pain. A life where I'm no longer the girl sitting quietly at the edge of the dinner table. Now, I can gently close the door on the past, open my heart to the present, and walk forward with certainty. I know now, a real family is where you're allowed to be fully yourself, and if you can't find that, you have every right to create a safe home of your own. No one is invisible who learns to value themselves. No one is left behind who has the courage to choose themselves. If you've ever felt belittled, excluded, or rejected, especially by those who should have loved you most, please remember, your true worth isn't defined by anyone else's recognition. It lives in your resilience, in your self-love, in the person you've become through the storms you've faced. Never be afraid to share your story, because you never know, you might be the voice of hope someone else has been waiting for in the darkness.